a little mess. I was a little drinking in the last ones. I'm not so drunk. So we're focusing on this book by Stephen Moore. Fans notes. Stephen Moore. Stephen Moore's written a couple books. He used to work at Donkey Archive, and here's a memoir. I recommend that book too. And this book. I mean, I'm not going to do so much a review of this book. I mean, I'm just going to talk about Laura Warholic and my own like little mini essay. Laura Warholic was like somebody that uh, you know, met in '91, and I'll tell you, and she wasn't really Laura Warholic back then. She was just some girl from Syracuse, New York. So, let's see. I wrote this a few years ago. It's almost 30 years since I met the person Laura Warholic that this novel is based on. After college, I moved to a post-beatnik and bohemian San Francisco in 1989. This San Francisco was very cheap to live in. Many people lived in large old Victorian apartment buildings all over the city, mostly in the Western Addition. At this time, when I met Laura, I was living in an ugly and average apartment in South Market area, which was known for, its lack of anything going on. There were some clubs there. It was just a bunch of warehouses and industrial buildings, and a few homeless people lurking around. There's a few cafes and restaurants. You had to walk a mile, unless you wanted to go. You could go on 11th Street. You had to walk a mile. Usually if you wanted to go to meet anybody, you had to walk over to Market Street to catch a bus or a train. It had the DNA was there, the Paradise Lounge, which is no more. Slim's, all that stuff was very close by. During most of the day, it was quite, a Brainwash was nearby. But there used to be a Buster's newsstand was over there. I lived with some hippie Germans who were just passing through town on their world travels. In his book, Alexander Thoreau, Fans Note, Steve Moore says Laura Warholic, or The Sexual Intellectual, 2007, is based on an affair Thoreau had in 1995-96 with a young woman named Laura Markley. Who is this person exactly? Laura Markley, Laura Warholic. I started calling her Warholic because it's the book. She's a little bit different in the book. She's and or I'll get to that later. Who is this person exactly? I thought here I would add to the overall picture. I met her in fall '91. It was a chance encounter. I left a note in the Rainbow Grocery Cooperative. It used to be on Market Street. Now it's over on Division Street. It's a lot bigger. It's more like a Trader Joe's or a Whole Foods now. It used to be like just a small hippie collective. During most of the, let's see, where am I? Okay, yeah, I meant it. Okay, so I put in, like, they had little boxes, and if you wanted to sell stuff. So I had a camera. I just figured I'd give it a shot. Maybe the summer of '91. I put, because I moved up there maybe August, South of Market, August '91. So I just probably put a thing in there just because I was bored. And I had this camera that my brother gave to me, and I just never really used it. So I go, okay, I'll sell it for $100. And it was a pro style camera. Like now, everyone, it would be like a digital camera or something. And then one day I got a call. It was Laura. I told her to meet me at my apartment on Dory Alley. I happened to be, when she came over, I was listening to John Coltrane. It's not, it was more likely I'd be listening to Leonard Cohen or Nick Cave or Wire or something, but I just happened to be listening to John Coltrane that day. Laura saw the camera, looked at it. I kind of convinced her to buy it. She was an art student, recent college graduate from the East Coast. We were both the same age. We were both 27 at the time. We walked back to Market Street and we found an ATM, and for some reason, she didn't have any money with her, and then on the way over, she told me she was involved in the poetry scene. It was like, oh, that meant back in those days, Cafe Babar and the Chameleon readings, and Paradise Lounge had a reading thing. And I didn't know who she was. I mean, she knew a lot of the same people. Bucky Sinister ran one of the readings at the Chameleon. She said she went there quite a bit. And and it's also through Bucky I met Squishy, who would show up later as a character in the book Laura Warholic. I've been going to those readings that she was talking about, Cafe Bar, Paradise Lounge, Chameleon, and other places, like since um, 89, even before that, because when I visited San Francisco, I would go there. And I didn't know any of the people she mentioned, like Gail Eigel, Zoe Rosenfeld, or I guess I knew Michelle C, but I don't think she mentioned her at that time. I never saw any of her, Laura, any of her friends at any of these readings. I would have probably noticed them. I think maybe I had, at this time, I had kind of like started going to San Francisco Art Institute and studying writing with Kathy Acker, and I wasn't going to readings as much, or just focusing on. Around that time, I also met Volman and other Norma Cole and a few others. Okay, so yeah, there was somehow in a few months there was a whole new group of young women in the scene. Now, I wasn't really part of the beat revival at the Cafe Bar. I was just kind of in the background. That was like a continuation of the North Beach spaghetti factory scene. So I sold the camera to Laura for $100, and I didn't really think much of it. It was like, oh, great, I could pay my rent this month. And then I didn't really think of her very much at all, because especially because I was just dealing with my South of Mar. I was working at an art gallery and kind of had a falling out with Brett from Art Attack, and so I was just kind of like, kind of moving on in my life. I kind of burned some bridges there and kind of was just kind of threw myself into the how are we doing time? Okay. I just kind of threw myself into the San Francisco Art Institute, and I was still friends with people like David Strauss and others. And I started going out with this girl, this Australian chick, Stephanie. And the next time I met Laura was at there was a Peter Fonda film tribute night. By this time I was living on 10th Street at Summit Theater, and the film person, Jack Stevenson, they would show two Peter Fonda films, and then they have bands playing the songs from the soundtrack, like in front of them and stuff. And there was like people from Brian Jonestown, like Christoph and Steve Brown and Jeff, Jeff, I forget his name, Jeff from the Brian Jonestown, Jeffrey. And, I was living around the corner over on Dory Alley, 9th and Folsom. I moved around over, and I lived with Otter Campbell and Simone Thurnarm, who were strippers and performance artists. And Otter was kind of known in the, in Ibiza and London, New York, San Francisco. She was kind of internationally known as a kind of performance artist and deviant. And Otter would later become a book, and she later became a character in the book Laura Warholic, because Laura became really obsessed with Otter and Squishy for some reason, because I was talking about them so much, and then neither one of them had met Theroux and stuff, and so I found myself at this event at Summit Theater. This is by 92. I was all day we didn't really have much. It was pretty much, we rented out the space, but we did sell popcorn and I think sodas or something, or beers or something. And so me and Otter spend most of the day just kind of making popcorn, and we put it in this big bag, and then we were going to sell it and make a little money ourselves. And then I noticed there was some hot chick in the room. There was mostly guys there, and there was oh, and then it was Laura, but I didn't really. And then she came up and said, "Oh, I want a refund. The popcorn is stale." Okay, here's your $1 back. It wasn't very expensive popcorn. It was just okay, here we go. And then I started talking to her, and then I figured out that, oh yeah, I sold you a camera 6 months before, and in those times I was still kind of hiding out and, kind of trying to avoid the whole Art Attack scene. And then I had already went through the Kathy Acker period, and then I was like kind of getting into hanging out with Otter and Simone and this and Danielle Willis and all those people, and we were kind of doing events at this on 10th Street and read poetry readings, and we did Angry Women there, and so I wasn't really. We were kind of doing our own thing, so yeah, I didn't go to the Cafe Babar Chameleon as much. By that time, I was even. We kind of took over. Me and Jill St. Jacques took over readings at the Blue Monkey, and because from Kathy Georges, who started the theater down the street, and we took over this by definitely by 92 or so. I forgot when that happened, but the Blue Monkey. But we were in like all the papers because there was a poetry license thing, and so anyway, so Laura, she said, "Oh, you're that Laura that I sold the camera to a few months ago," and she said, "Oh yeah, it doesn't work." And I knew that was a lie because I had taken pictures with it. I showed her a whole book of pictures I'd taken with it. She just didn't. I mean, there might have been something wrong with the light monitor, but it didn't work. I don't know. She just, cameras either do them. You either know how to adjust the settings, or you just put it on automatic and just take pictures that way. So in spring '92, around that time, I finished writing Five Fingers Make a Fist, and it was published around the same time. It was later published in 2007, around the same time as Alexander Thoreau's book. I had won the Bay Guardian Poetry Contest in early '92. I started running into Laura more on Paradise Lounge, and because I lived right there. That was probably the only one I went to at that point. And I did a few spoken reading. I did a reading with Otter in April of '92, right before she left for Ibiza. And then as I left one event at Chameleon, I know, yeah, when me and Otter read, Laura was there. She's kind of like scoping me out, like she was, she probably thought Otter and I were a couple at the time. And I remember my friends, S.A. Griffin and others came, they did some readings, and me and Otter were hanging out with them. And Laura, I ran into Laura at the Paradise Lounge, and somehow she was, like I felt like, I was just kind of, just friendly with her. And like at this point, it was like more like flirty. And I think I knew she had a boyfriend or something. She probably mentioned it the first time. It didn't seem like she was interested in me, but we were talking this time, and it was like, yeah, we should do something together, but I'm gonna move to LA for a couple months, so give me your address or phone number, and then because I, like everybody at that point, everybody had left the warehouse, and like Otter and George Holmesy, who was part of Survival Research Laboratories, and some others, and it became like, so I mentioned who, but there were some other people that came in that were kind of doing drugs and heroin, and it just became, the vibe totally changed. This guy from Chicago came in there, and I was like telling Simone, I'm going, yeah, I don't really like this new guy from Chicago. I'm moving out. So I put my stuff in storage, and went to LA for most of the summer, and then that's where I wrote another book. And so at that same time, I was just writing Laura letters, and we got to know each other through the letters. And I remember I was reading William T. Vollmann's Horrors for Gloria around that time, because I mentioned it in one of my letters. And when I met her, she had talked about Bukowski, Henry Miller, and Beat Generation people, and it was mostly stuff that I read 10 years before, and I thought were just kind of like stuff that you read. She was, at this time, she was like, in '92, she was like something like 27, and she was reading like books I read when I was like 16 or 17. And she wasn't really in English. She was like she went to art school at Parsons and stuff, but she can draw. She was an artist. She was like planning to be an artist. And, I had read, by this time I had read over 1,000 books. I had got a BA in English literature. I had taken classes with S.E. Gontarski and Jacques Derrida. I had met Matthews, Sorrentino, and even William Vollman by then. Laura was from Syracuse. I didn't even know where that was at the time. Even though I lived in Brooklyn in 91, her parents were divorced. She was English and Polish. Her dad had married quickly to a better family. He kind of upgraded, and the mom was just kind of a drunk in Massachusetts and kind of boozing up. No real plan. She later died, a few years ago, 10 or so years ago. She had a younger sister who she was retarded and like lived in like some kind of home and something. And she hooked up with some fashion oriented guy in high school who people thought were gay, and they both moved to New York, and she went to Parsons School of Design. And then she told me that she had a secure relationship with some guy. I don't even know who that was, and then she decided, I'm going to travel to Mexico and move to San Francisco or something. Or I guess, she did have some drawing ability. I shared some of these notebooks with Steven Moore, there's some of these, there's pictures of, there's like a little something in here. I don't know, where is it? An interview. Oh, no, let's see. Yeah, let's see what, there's some pictures in here. But, I shared, there's some notebooks. He saw the notebooks. Her poetry wasn't bad. It was, sort of beat inspired. Her reviews, she wrote art reviews for Cups magazine, and that was like the best stuff she ever wrote. Laura's problem was she didn't really have a focus. She didn't really, was she going to be a writer? Is she going to be an artist? She didn't really present herself. Hey, I'm going to do art. We would run into people that she went to art school with. And some of these people are Jacqueline Humphreys and Isabel Samaras. And those people were having shows and, 10, whatever it was, 5 or 10 years later, they were having shows. Like Isabel Samaras did stuff for Cups magazine, and like Laura was with me, and we go, she knows each other. And then, Laura studied with Sean Scully, who was a famous artist. And of course, Laura only regarded him as someone she flirted with. She ended up with some secretary job. Why did she spend all that time? I remember, she had a bunch of artwork and stuff, and they just ended up throwing it away because, like, she was like 25 years old and having a midlife crisis. She would get scouted. She would often, like, these guys in New York would see her on the streets and give her like a card, like an agency, show up at the Wilhelmina thing. She never, because she was like pretty tall, like 5'7", 5'8", 5'9", maybe, and she was real thin, so she'd be walking around when she went to Parsons and over there Union Square or something. It's difficult. I mean, she was working in some secretarial job. It was probably difficult, seeing people in magazines and having art shows, and you're still being a secretary and you're sitting in an office. And she decided to move. She always dated guys who never shared her desire to see the world. Sometime around 90, she ended up in San Francisco, and it was like some new city where she could kind of pretend to be a hippie. She soon had a boyfriend. She went out with this guy named Ian from Iowa. She attracted regular looking guys. Like everybody I saw besides myself and, the early high school boyfriend were, just kind of average like guys, just kind of regular Joes. They didn't really do anything. They just kind of like, we're kind of like, like a, it's like, it's like she's like this hot chick, and then she ends up with like just some regular looking Mickey Rooney type looking guy. Okay, so from when we were writing those letters, I told her, I'm coming back to San Francisco. I'm looking for an apartment. My stuff is in storage. She says, I'm going to Europe for 2 months. Her boyfriend Ian wasn't going with her. I was like kind of like, those first 3 years in San Francisco, I thought was, I had written like Five Fingers Make a Fist in a book of poetry, and I won the bigger. But I thought it was just starting to happen. When I went back, I wanted to, I was going to do some readings and kind of apply myself, and a lot of people had left that were there at that time in the early '90s. Like it went to Prague, and Stephanie, my Australian girlfriend, she went back to Australia. Otter was still in Europe at the time. The town had kind of changed. Like my friend, when I came back, in that summer of '92 or late summer, early fall, Ying Guo was like my best friend, and so like. So what happened was, like, Laura went to Europe. I took her room for like 2 months, and so during that time, I became friends with Zoe Rosenfeld and Gail Eigel, who's known as Gail Bagel in the novel Laura Warholic. And so I think I hung out. I think I went on some dates with Zoe Rosenfeld, or just met her for coffee or something. And Gail Eigel is married. She's always been married. I'm still friends with Gail Eigel. And they both wrote poetry, and like she wrote letters to Laura. So Laura, I didn't know Laura was like kind of planning to go out with me on the way back. It was kind of some flirtation. But when she got back, she was kind of mean to me. Go, what are you still doing here? Get the hell out, And then I just, luckily, this is around the time my grandmother died, and there was my friends Bob Annecy and Rob Clark lived a block away, so I just moved in with them, and it was a cheap rent, and I just lived a block away, and Yang helped me move all my stuff in there, and then for some reason, Laura, she was kind of mean, and she was like reading through my journals and stuff, and like, and then I helped her get on unemployment, and then she like did this thing where she felt like, oh yeah, we got to see each other every day for that week and stuff, and it was like, okay, whatever, I'll help you get on unemployment. We made up some employer that she was supposedly working for, and then eventually, because we were like hanging out all the time, she was like ignoring her boyfriend, and he's like kind of wondering what the hell's going on, and we kind of walk into him in the mission, and it's like, I felt like, there's no, what, she's kind of critical. She's like asking me a lot of questions and real critical. It's like, oh, like what the hell's going on? So, but once we started going out and having sex, and everything was great, and I introduced her to my friend Ying Guo, and she thought he was gay. And then I met her friends, and they were when I met her friends, they were like always like these ugly left wing dudes who were depressed, dark, and alcoholic. Often they were unemployed and poor, bike messengers. And she saw my library and my books. She said, "You actually read all these books?" And then and I was into language poetry, and by this time I was really into Donkey Archive and Fiction Collective 2 books. And Gail Eigel, I think, was the only one who had read An Adultery, or knew about Theroux at all. I had read about him in the Review of Contemporary Fiction. So I kind of the authors that they talked about in Review of Contemporary Fiction, and like I started getting into them at that time, and I probably wrote to them and said, "Hey, let's do an interview or send me some poems." And then, well, as we hung out more, it was obvious that she hadn't read too much. I mean, she basically stopped writing stuff, like a lot, she stopped trying to be a poet and stuff, because I think she was kind of intimidated by me. And then early on when we were going out, she kind of flipped out that I had went on a date with Zoe Rosenfeld, and she wrote a letter to her, and telling her that, yeah, I'm going out with Alexander Lawrence, stay away from this guy. And so we had broken up for a week, and yeah. So and then okay, so and then I was still living. I was doing by definitely by '93. I was like doing organize. One of the things I did was the Blue Monkey Cafe. I was like the organizer. Joel St. Jacques only kind of left off. So at the very beginning of '93, I was like doing these I was, and then that's right. I met Dave Eggers, and he was the editor of Cups magazine. So I think I was in like April or May '93. That's where I met Dave Eggers, and at the first meeting, like Brian Benson and Tom Stolmar were there. And at the first meeting, I said, hey, we got to interview Volman, Mark Leiner, Dorothy Allison, Avital Rennell. And those people like were pretty much the guys that showed up in the issues of '93. And then pretty much I did all the literary interviews pretty much, except for occasional one by Tom Stolmar and David Strauss. Did one with Carl Ricosi or somebody. But Strauss kind of focused on the music and stuff, and then Laura Warholic was the art writer, and then Eggers left in early '94 to do Might magazine. David Latimer was the publisher. I had known him for like about 5 years, and we focused on when Cups magazine. I became the literary editor, and we focused a lot on Dalkey Archive books and stuff like this, Fiction Collective, Dalkey Archive. And so yeah, '93 was the good year. That was when Cup started. I think even Zoe Rosenfeld ended up going to Prague or something. I don't know. I was things. Oh yeah, Otter and Squishy, did visit me like February '93, and like, Laura just happened to be over in Syracuse visiting her family and stuff. And so like a lot of the stuff from the book, Alexander Thoreau's book about Otter and Squishy, like kind of are centered around this time and stuff. But still with all this kind of, she didn't know what was going on, but she was like she didn't really like Otter and Squishy very much, and we all hung out, and Otter and Squishy knew Ying Guo. So with all the shenanigans going on, I was still during this time. I interviewed Martin Amis, Will Self, Volman, Douglas Cooper, Irvin Welsh, and just everybody that would come through to San Francisco on a book tour. And then the whole time, like Laura became kind of jealous. She would critique me all the time. She wrote like her thing was like she just wrote all these letters, which we'll find out later. She complained, she was like a big complainer the whole time. She had all these bills, she had all these student loans. And then by the end of '93, like her grandmother bailed her out. And then, she stopped talking about that. And I go, okay, well, you should take a class with Kathy Acker and read more. And, give her, she did a couple of interviews, and during that time, she never really talked about going to Europe or Mexico or something. She just wanted she wanted my attention, and her, like, and she wanted everyone to know that we were going out, which I think everyone did. And then any female friendships with female writers like Mary Gaitskill, Eurydice Wurtzel, like just kind of troubled her. And at that time, she decided to seek revenge on me. She wrote letters to Donald Gross and Thoreau. And I go, yeah, go ahead. I don't care. I wasn't really jealous. Like, I don't know what, you don't know these people. Why are you writing to them? What's the point? And then, like we went out for about 3 years, or more. She didn't want to, we were talking about getting like our own apartment, and we had roommates, and so we lived at 745 Baker. And me and Laura, we both had our own rooms on the edge, and then we had a couple roommates in the middle, and and then other things happened. And then we broke up a few times. One was over Zoe Rosenfeld, just like and then there was the whole Mary Gaitskill thing, and that was like maybe a month. It was longer, maybe 2 months, when I found out she wrote she likes she didn't know where Mary Gaitskill lived and stuff, and she like went through my books and found her address. And then I went to LA, and she did the same thing again to this LA um, magazine editor person. At that time I was thinking maybe I was going to move to LA. Maybe in '95, I was thinking, maybe I had enough of LA. Like, the Laura Warholic thing was ending soon, and so when I got back to San Francisco in '95, we had broken up. The relationship was going nowhere. She moved in with her. She went to Boston for a week, but she just stayed there. And then Daniel Murtaugh, the photographer, was the new roommate. We didn't really do any vetting. We just kind of like, okay, him and his girlfriend are moving into Laura's room. Okay, we need someone to pay the rent. And then people would go, hey, what happened to Laura? I go, I don't know. She just left and she's gone. And then she just kind of moved. And so like, and then she wrote a bunch of letters. She stopped. We kind of ceased communication. She wrote letters to Daniel Murtaugh, and one of these is in the Steven Moore book. I mean, Laura didn't have a lot of friends in San Francisco anyway. I mean, besides Gail Eigel and Michelle C. And so, I mean, eventually she wasn't missed at all. She just started a new life. And so after, I just kind of focused on Cups, and Cups got bigger. And, I was out of touch with her for like a year. She would be sending letters to Dan. And then at the beginning of '96, Cups, we moved to New York. And at the beginning of '97, I decided to go to Boston, and I contacted her, and somehow she had already broken up with Theroux by this time. There was like, she had like short hair. She was working as a secretary for a lawyer. I think she was on Prozac, which killed her sex drive. The meeting was cold and distant. She told me that she had dated Theroux, but she was hiding from and I got married in '97, and I told Laura about it, and then she wanted to be friends all of a sudden. And apparently she was in New York all the time, and even made a trip with Theroux. Like they spent some time in like on Bleecker Street with where Justin Theroux lived, or slept on the floor or something. Or she told me, and then I let her stay. Like when I moved in with my wife over in Williamsburg at my old apartment, I let her stay there, and then she would stay at a hostel. Like we were both like 30 by this time, or no, even older than that, 30, 32, 33. And she would stay at like hostels over in Chelsea. I never even heard of that place, of the Chelsea hostel. That was the first time I even heard of the place. And she was 30, we were 33, and she was still living like she was 23, like, and I remember one time when we saw The Liars at Coney Island High. That was the first time I heard of Jeff Connolly. I didn't really pay much attention to DMZ or The Liars or anything. And all those bands a lot of the Boston stuff shows up in the book, Laura Warholic. And when she came to New York, we attended Cave Stop 99, and Laura was into garage rock and '60s music, because the guys that she was into were all into that stuff, like Jeff Connolly and this other guy. Let's see, blah 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 blah. Also, I met Jared Everett, who was in The Liars. He ended up being in Darker My Love and White Fence. Jeff and Jared both work at record stores on Newbury Street. And then I had a weird encounter with Jeff Connolly, Mono Man. And then Laura came to LA in 2003, and we see The Liars for a final time. And Jared Everett basically just moved to LA. And back to Theroux. It was sometime in '98. They had broken up for a while. He started writing me letters, and I somehow he had figured out I'd kind of reconnected with Laura Warholic. And was he stalking her? Laura mentioned a restraining order. I didn't think that was serious. Laura and I didn't talk about Theroux too much. I mean, she just kind of, when the subject came up, she just kind of, dismissed it. I didn't really think about him for years. I did interview Paul Theroux, just because I don't know. That one book he wrote in '98, I kind of liked it. She played off the brief failed relationship with the guy 25 years old. She's just kind of, she just said, whatever, and like I've known her for like 30 years, and most guys she dated were like her own age or younger. Thoreau, she's not really into guys that are like 20, 30 years older than her. Like I know other friends of mine would date people like that, like I don't know. That wasn't really her thing. I mean, if you look at all the guys they were either her age or a couple years younger. Okay, was Thoreau spying on us in New York and Boston? He contacted me and he wanted me to spy on Laura and give him any information for his book. I thought he was joking that he was writing a book about Laura. I saw her at the time. There was one time me and her met Nick Zed at a cafe over at the L Cafe one time. But she seemed to be showing, like, if I went to Boston like 4 or 5 times in these years, and like Laura must have come to New York around the same time. And usually when the Liars were playing. Let's see, my wife wanted to move to London. I was living in London, New York, LA, and making trips all over. Cups had folded in '99. I worked for some magazines, and I was, Cups had died, and I had moved on. I started doing Free Williamsburg, and I thought Laura Warholic would never happen at the time. In the early 2000s, and then I had never really written before this thing. I've never really talked about Laura Warholic or the real Laura. I never really written about her. When I actually got to read a little bit of Laura Warholic, it's not really about me or Laura. It's just about Thoreau and his frustrations with the world in private. Laura told me not to speak to him. She probably enjoyed the intention, but she never bothered to read the book. I didn't think it would ever come out. So I saw a chapter of it, and Conjunctions published a chapter of it. And then like years later, Steve Moore contacted me, and he sent me the first 3 chapters. I go, let me see what it's like. I want to read this. And then I'm going, and I'm thinking to myself, well, at that time it was like Steve Moore kind of made some cuts, but at this time it was like over 1,000 pages. And no one's going to publish this thing. And because it's a very negative book. It finally came out in 2007. I just skimmed it. Originally, I just skimmed it to see any details. There was about 500. I mentioned about 550 or 100 times, or there seemed like, but it seemed like most of it's kind of made up. It just seems like Thoreau's like a writer who doesn't give a fuck anymore. I asked her if she was going to read the book. She said, hell no. And I told Gail Eichel about it. She wasn't interested in it. And, who is this book really for? Like, who's going to read it besides it being like a self-indulgent book? I mean, Thoreau had already written a couple books like this, in Adultery, Darconville's Cat. Why is he writing a third book, like a revenge novel? I sat down and actually read the book a few years ago. I made notes and any references to me. I didn't skim it this time. I read the whole essay. Most writers would include an essay that goes on for like about 3 pages. But Thoreau, and he has an essay in the book that goes on 40, 50 pages. When some character goes on a rant, it could be summarized in about 3 sentences, but Thoreau lets it go on for pages. He can cram in more details and information, like in like the Laura Warholic rant on page 699. I do miss the idea of the big novel, but I don't really read very many of these books anymore. I mean, I have the other video with 5 big books, but besides Jerusalem, a lot of them I've read a long time ago. I haven't really read Jerusalem, which came out 6 or 7 years ago. We'll see if I read any older books. I want to read Homer, Don Quixote, Middlemarch, Ulysses, which I'm reading right now, in Magic Mountain. But hats off to anyone who can publish a big, hefty, angry, nihilistic, scorched the earth book that people will hate. at the end of the day, I feel like I've, this Laura Warholic person. I mean, she was way different when I met her. She wasn't like this person that's in the book that hates, that, is pissed off at any mention of, Kathy Acker or Mary Gateskill or, like, the Laura that I met in '91 didn't even know who these people were. It's like it just seemed like some weird kind of thing. Like I kind of developed this person, kind of this, or she didn't even know who Theroux was. Like I introduced her to this whole world, and then she be, and then just this and the sexual intellectual or whatever it's called. I don't really see her as that way. I mean, she was a nice, quiet girl from Syracuse. Maybe she was a deadhead as far as I know. I didn't know. I didn't see her as a sexual maniac, and thus the inspiration for a hateful book, and for some clown who worship at the altar of some madness. I have a hunch that possibly Thoreau had already written 500, at least half of this book before he even knew, Laura Warholic, and then she kind of recast it with kind of put because a lot of this stuff could have been written pre Laura. But I'm glad Stephen Moore has come to write a book as insightful as Fan Notes. He needs some attention. I mean, nobody's, very few people, except for a few book nerds, are like talking about Thoreau. Or I don't think, like Three Wogs is a great book. Darconville Cat is probably the best book. Adultery is worth checking out. His poetry isn't really so great. The Laura Warholic book is is kind of a re-echoing of some kind of past greatness that's that happened in the 70s, and maybe it's an expression of feeling at a loss of relevance, and not as Thoreau's work has become marginal over the years, but literature itself and literary novel is like something of the past. It's like hopefully maybe people will get back into it in a serious way, and I have a little interest in the personality of Thoreau, and I haven't read any of his recent books in the last 20 years. I see a few titles, and but the early stuff is great writing and as good as anything that was out there. Thanks for creating an outline of the entire scope of the work, and not everyone's gonna like go on and read this stuff, But let's see, we've been going on a while. 40 minutes. Oh my God. Any questions? Okay, well, maybe let's end that.